Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. Feel free to use the chat box for any questions or comments during the presentation. If we're unable to get to them during the presentation, we'll make sure that they're all answered by the end. My name is Braden Knutson. I will be your host for this webinar. We'd like to remind everyone that all of these webinars are being recorded and posted onto the BYU Family History Library website, as well as onto our YouTube channel. We'd encourage you all to subscribe so you can receive notifications of all the videos that are posted and stay up to date on those. Today we will be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled Scanning Documents, Photos, and Slides, the Basics for Genealogists. James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctor degree in law at Arizona State University. He served for 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He has previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 32 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren. So we'll turn the time over to James now and let him take it away for us today.
Howdy, this is James Tanner. We're here with another BYU Family History Library webinar, and remind everybody that these webinars are being recorded and uploaded to our BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, and we would invite you to subscribe if you'd like to have notice of when the new webinars are uploaded. We've been uploading webinars and classes, shorter classes, short of instructional videos, about 3 or 4 this week. We'll probably have about 6 total this week, so almost one a day. We're going to talk about scanning documents, photos, and slides, the basics for genealogists. And I guess we would ask the question of whether or not you have stacks of old or new photos laying around. You may not have noticed this over the last few years, but it's pretty obvious. Film photography is definitely on its way out. There are still only a very few places that have the capacity to develop negatives and to develop negative film, for example. But what really I think put the nail in the coffin of the photography business was when Kodak discontinued what was called Kodachrome film, which was the most popular and most used film out there. Since none of those, the main supplier today of photographic film is Fuji, and Fujifilm is still available. For some of the photographers still use that. So from once in a while we get someone who's still taking photos. But today what we're getting is just a huge mass of digitalized photos being taken and uploaded and shared and everything on the internet. So we're mainly here talking about photos taken from the time when photography was developed back in the 1840s up until about 5 or 6 years ago, when it became almost entirely digital. So perhaps in addition to that, you have a huge pile of old documents and certificates and letters and other things in boxes around your house or stored someplace. These are all candidates for digitization. That means that you can take digital copies of the items and then share them with members of your family, so you have a greater opportunity to share and look at all of the things that other people have put online. Maybe you have a few boxes of old slides, 35 millimeter. If you have some real old slides, you may have actually slides that are larger or different than a 35 millimeter slide. There are ways that I'll talk about here to digitize those slides. One of the problems we've seen with slides is maybe they begin to fade. Some of the film used for 35 millimeter slides back in the old days has now started to fade considerably. This is even if you haven't used them a lot and you've just left them in a box someplace, and the chemical composition of the slides created the fact that they would fade. Or it was even worse now is that there are color shifts on the slides. I had a lot of slides that I took many years ago and had really not taken them out. But when I did, I found that a considerable number of them had gone to an orangey color. There were some types of film that I used during that period of time that were not very stable. I decided that it was a mandatory call for me to start digitizing all of these photos. So I began the process of digitizing my flat photos, paper photos, and the slides. And one of the most important things is, do you have old photos that you want to share with your family members? This particular photo here was taken from what's called a glass negative. It's the old view cameras, the big old boxes on tripods that they show in the movies with the flash powder that they take the picture of. Those big box cameras are called view cameras because the back of the camera was essentially a piece of glass, and when you opened the lens, you looked through the lens to see the photo projected in an image on the glass. It was usually upside down and backwards, by the way, so the photographer had to get used to looking at upside down and backwards photos. But what was used to capture the slide was a chemically treated piece of glass, just window glass, like a flat piece of glass. They came in standard sizes and were purchased by the photographers to use, and then the coatings, that glass plate was then taken and within a very short time, it was called a wet plate process because they had to take that glass plate out of the camera and get it developed before it dried out. And if you were taking pictures in Arizona in the summer, that was probably not going to happen. But they got to be so that their chemical developing place was usually a wagon or something that was, or another room in the studio, and they would simply move that directly from there to developing within a few minutes to develop it. Once they developed it, they had a permanent photograph on the glass, which could then be used to create other images and or prints from and a lot of times during the end of the 1800s, they began to develop paper film where the paper was light sensitive and then could hold an image. So they began printing onto the paper with these from the glass negatives. And the negatives were glass, but when they were projected, they would reverse that and make a positive on the paper. So I would say that it's time for you to start digitizing those old photos and records. It's a process. It does take time. And there's kind of two completely polarly opposite philosophies of the way to do this. There's those of us who I would classify myself who just start at one point and start digitizing everything in view. Photo after photo and paper after paper until we have tens of thousands, in my case, a couple of 100,000 images on our computers, and then we use the computers to tag and identify and sort and make the photos, puts the photos in some kind of an organization. At the other end of the spectrum are the people who are concerned about the organization, and they get into the problem of doing all of their organizing before they do the digitizing. So they come in with everything in neat piles and neatly identified. Believe me, that doesn't save any time. Once you get it into the computer, you still have to tag the images, that is, identify the people in the images and the places, and you also have to put titles on them and do all of that again. So organizing can be one of the biggest stumbling blocks to getting the items into the computer and digitized. So what are the options that we have available? What can we use to transfer all of this paper, uh, glass, photo film, and slides, all sorts of different formats there, to uh, a digital image on a computer? Now, when we're talking about a digital image, we're talking about a sensor, camera sensor, or a computer sensor, or a scanning sensor that takes the variations in light from the object, from the photograph or the slide, and translates that into a series of ones and zeros that the computer can understand, and then the computer programs can then turn around and display that image on the screen of the computer. So it seems, like Arthur Clarke's comment many years ago when he said that any sufficiently advanced technology appears to be magic. Well, scanning is one of those magic technologies where you put a piece of a photograph down on a piece of glass on a scanner, and it does its thing, and then a few seconds later you have a copy of that on your computer screen. That's pretty well close to magic in my words, but there's a whole long technical way that it happens. But fortunately for you, I'm not going to go through that whole process today, because this is supposed to be for genealogists and not for electronic technicians or for professional photographers. The first option here is what we call a flatbed scanner. These are this is a kind of a generic image of one. They have a cover that can be raised. They have a sheet of glass that is the place where you place the object. Anyone who's familiar with the copy machine understands the process, and it's the same process, except they don't kick out a piece of paper. They kick out a digital file that is sent over or saved to your computer. So these flatbed scanners, the advantages are that they're very inexpensive. Right now, a very adequate 8.5 by 11 flatbed scanner from Canon or from Epson or from HP or someone else will cost you the grand sum of about 49 bucks. They're in the $40 to $50 range, and they're perfectly serviceable. They do a wonderful job of scanning, and most people just don't realize how inexpensive they are unless they go looking on Amazon or in one of the stores like Best Buy or whatever. Now, the other part of it is they're very convenient because they plug right into your computer, your laptop, your desktop computer, and you can then scan away hour after hour, and all of those images will be accumulating on your hard drive or on your flash drive or on your external hard drive, wherever you designate that those files are stored. You also get very high quality images. The quality of these images is not, we'll talk about that because we're going to talk about resolution. I will talk about resolution here very shortly, but let's just say that flatbed scanners will get you today about the same high quality no matter what the price of the scanner is. We're not talking about off-name brand, really cheap scanners. We're talking about scanners that are manufactured by the major companies. I've mentioned a few. There are more. The simplest way to do this is to look online and ask for reviews of the flatbed scanners and just see what's the best, the most recent reviews say. The only thing with reviews is be careful you're not reading review from the manufacturer, because they're going to obviously edit anything that comes out really, really bad. So it's helpful to get some user type of input on the scanners themselves. Now, I've used Canon scanners for years, and I then decided to look at an Epson scanner, and there was one feature on the Epson scanner that made me buy the Epson scanner, and that was that the lid stays open halfway when you raise it. On the Canon, you always had to raise it all the way over and back and then put it all the way back. But on the Epson, you could just move it up halfway and stick the paper in and take the old paper out. And that would, and then it saved maybe a half a second or two, or a second or two in each photo, but when you're doing thousands of photos, that begins to be a big issue. Here's another option, is a digital camera. In this case, digital cameras are the cost of the camera depends on the quality of the camera. I guess you could turn that around and say the quality depends on the cost, but not necessarily. There are some very, very good cameras now in the $200 to $300 range, maybe $400, that are very, very high quality, and for the type of reproduction that needs to be done for digitizing documents, for example, they are more than adequate. So it's not necessary here to go very high quality, but to get really, really high quality images, particularly of photographs, then a digital camera that has the ability to do that is going to cost a lot more than a scanner of the same quality. So for example, over the years, I started with digital cameras when they were only like 1 or 2 megapixel cameras. And as I went through that process, I was always taking pictures of documents and photographs to see whether or not I could use a digital camera instead of a flatbed scanner to take pictures of those documents. And it wasn't until the digital cameras got above 10 megapixels that the text images, pictures of documents, were essentially equal to what could be done on a scanner at about 300 dots per inch on a flatbed scanner. But photographs waited until the digital cameras got well above 20 megapixels before an image of a photograph taken with a digital camera was the equivalent of the image taken, created by a flatbed scanner. So a 20 megapixel camera with a really good lens, which is also part of the whole equation, can cost anywhere from around $1,000 up to whatever you want to pay. Right today, we have cameras like the Hasselblads that are running like $30,000. So cameras are kind of an open-ended thing. Obviously, you would need to have, if you were looking at a high-end camera, you either have a lot of extra money to spend, or you are a professional and are looking at it as a business investment or part of what you do as part of your activities that are important, not just with genealogy. But for buying this type of camera for genealogy is way over the top unnecessary. Convenient. That's one thing that's very important now. One thing that's happening recently on cameras is that they're being incorporated into smartphones. And the resolution of the smartphones cameras is now rivaling some of the better digital cameras. And so you can really get a fairly good image with a digital camera in your smartphone now if you have one of the newer smartphones. Something that's come out recently in the last 1 or 2 or 3 years rather than some of the older cameras. Now, we'll talk about that a little more. I will in just a moment. Now, the one thing that makes the digital camera attractive instead of a flatbed scanner is the speed. One thing about a scanner is you put your paper down on the scanner, and even if it's a newer or brand new model scanner, it's going to go for a few seconds before the image is complete, and then it's going to sit there and resolve the image and then transmit it to your computer. All of that process can take, with the moving the paper in and out of the scanner, can take a few seconds to maybe 10 or 15 seconds per image. If you get really good at lifting the screen, switching out the paper and clicking the image and waiting for it to process. However, with the digital camera, the imaging process becomes virtually instantaneous. You have your camera set up, preferably on some kind of tripod or camera stand, so that you're not handling it personally with your hands, and you have a remote connect cable. And in fact, some of the digital cameras will automatically connect to a computer, and you can click on the computer screen and thereby take the picture with the camera. So it becomes extremely faster, much. The time the decrease in the time it takes to make an image with a digital camera is a very small percentage of the time it takes with a flatbed scanner. And so if you're doing thousands of images, then then taking them with a camera is much more efficient. So there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off here. But when you're doing with a camera, you need to have some specialized equipment. So the cost of the camera itself is only the beginning. You do need some kind of a device to make the camera stationary. You need some way to hold the camera at a 90-degree angle to whatever you're taking a picture of, particularly photos, if you're trying to reproduce photos with a camera. Because the angle is off slightly, then you'll have a distorted view of the original. One of the things that is very helpful to have for a camera is a light box. This is a picture of a light box. This one's kind of a homemade one. They do have cameras, light boxes that are made for genealogists. There's also just a whole bunch of them out there for sale to photographers. They cost anywhere from around $100 and $150 up to as much as you want to spend. Actually, they make light boxes as big as a room, and basically the purpose is for commercial photography to prevent shadows. So the idea here of a light box is that there are no hot spots from the lights that you're using to illuminate the subject. That's one of the big issues with a camera is getting enough light so that you have uniform illumination across the entire object or item to be digitized, and not a spot from a flash or from a light that creates what's called a hot spot or a bright spot on the item. At the high end of scanning, there are sheet feed scanners. They begin at around $350 on up. And when I say on up, I mean on up. You can spend $2,000 or $3,000, $4,000 or $5,000, $10,000 on a sheet fed scanner. This one, the type that's shown here, the key here for photographs is that a scanner needs to have what's called a straight line feed. Most photographs do not do well if they are bent or curled through a scanner. Hence the need for the flatbed scanners that I talked about initially. But there are those that are made particularly to do photographs, and they depending on the size of the scanner and the size of the photographs that you want to scan, the cost can be very much more expensive than either a digital camera or a flatbed scanner. You can explore these online. There's the major manufacturers all have them. Kodak actually makes a flatbed scanner a sheet fed scanner for photographs. There is also Canon has this sheet fed scanners, and some of the other manufacturers. Epson has a nice one for around $300 to $400. And they're very good if you're doing a lot of paper. If it's a lot of 8.5 by 11 sheet paper with images on both sides, double-sided paper, then you can simply put that stack of paper in the sheet fed scanner and click scan, and it will sit there and run through the whole package of paper. Some of the larger sheet fed scanners will take up to 500 sheets of paper at a time, and so you can do quite on both sides and scan both sides of the paper. So they're very good if you happen to have a book that's in manuscript form, that it hasn't been bound, and that you still have the loose sheets. Then you can do the whole book in a matter of just a few minutes. We have one of those a very high-end Canon sheet-fed scanner here at the library, and at Family History Library here at BYU, and I've used it to scan books. of 400 or 500 pages, and it takes about 5 to 6 minutes to get through a book of about 400 or 500 pages. So this is a very, very fast way to work if you need to. You may find something like this available at a service center someplace. Some libraries and some, like the BYU library here, provide this type of equipment to the public to walk in and use without charge. A lot of places, if you went to a commercial place, they would scan that for you on their sheet-fed scanner, but then they would charge you per page for scanning. And this only works with documents unless you buy a scanner that is specifically set up for photos that has what I call a straight feed. That is, the photo goes straight through the scanning device rather than curling or curving at all. And as I mentioned a couple of times now, they're much faster. Now, there are high-end scanners, as I mentioned, specialty scanners that are built for the specific purpose of scanning certain types of documents. Book scanners, for example, that will take bound books and scan 2 of the pages simultaneously. We have a couple of those here in the library to use, and they are extremely useful for the process of doing anything that's in a bound volume. They adjust for the curvature of the paper, and they also sort out the right and left-hand pages at the same time, crop the margins. Some of them even go to the extent of removing any extraneous markings, like if you're holding down the book with your fingers, it'll take your fingers out of the picture automatically. Some of editing features on these scanners. They are, let's just call them usually out of the budget of the average genealogist. They're not something that you have at home. You would really have to find a place that lets you use it on a per piece basis or whatever, because they start at around $8,000 or $10,000 and go up from there. The ones that are really elaborate will turn the pages automatically on a book. And some of them, the high-end ones, which run into the $100,000 range, actually can actually scan very, very rare documents, and they have specialized air suction devices that lift the pages and turn the pages carefully so that no one even touches the pages as they turn. And those are, way up there, folks. But they exist, and it's nice to know that they're out there. They're very fast, by the way. Doing a book on one of these book scanners is just immeasurably faster than trying to do it on a flatbed scanner. And they scan at very high quality, so you get a very high quality. Most of what you see online on digitized book websites and newspaper sites and things like that have been scanned by these specialty scanners, the people who do this commercially. So they're up there. Okay, now we're going to talk about resolution. Once we've decided what kind of equipment we have, the first thing we're going to be confronted with is a question from the software asking us, what dot per inch would you like to use, or what resolution of your photo would you like to have it scanned out? Now, I come from a technical background, and I am also a professional photographer, and I have been doing photography since I was about 8 or 9 years old. I think I still have some of my photos. In fact, I was looking at them the other day, some of the very first photos I ever took, and I think I was about 11 years old when I got those photos, and that I still have copies of. And they're really bad, by the way. They're just ferocious. I was no child prodigy in photography, believe me. Anyway, but the issue always has been focus, getting the document or image in focus so that it was sharp and clear and could be read. And to do that, we have to talk a lot about resolution, because that's what we're talking about, whether the document is sharp and clear. Now, what you're seeing on the screen here now is pixels, great big pixels of a photo. this blown up photo someplace. If I zoomed out far enough on this, there would actually be a recognized picture here. And that essentially is what all of these digital devices do. They create little square boxes of dots, if you will, that make up images. Okay, so if you want to know the latest word on where to go to find all of the recommended things for genealogists and archivists and librarians around the country, there is a website called the Library of Congress Preservation Site. It's part of loc.gov, loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress government site. And if you look at they've changed their website just recently, and it was right on the front page of their startup page, but now you probably have to do a search on the website for preservation. But there is a preservation directorate, and this particular part of the Library of Congress has whole bunches of different things, like preservation frequently asked questions, and it talks about home preservation, what kinds of things you need to do at home. And this is where you would go to find out the information about the latest standards for digitizing documents out there. When they're talking about preservation, they're also talking about preserving artifacts, however you say that word, the just stuff that people collect, physical objects, dresses to whatever. But in this particular case, we're talking about their digital care and collection care of digital items, and they have the standards. They have the links out there to all of the major websites that talk about what dots per inch you should use and what all that means. So here's your basics website for document and other object preservation. loc.gov, Library of Congress. Or here's the whole address. So you could put loc.gov/preservation and you'll get to this page. One of the most important part of the page is personal archiving, and that talks about preserving your original documents and your original photographs, as well as taking digital copies and maintaining digital copies of those same items. And this one is under a completely different government site, but it's still the Library of Congress, and it's digitalpreservation.gov/personal archiving. Now, if you don't have something to write this down, just remember that these videos are uploaded, and when they're on the YouTube the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, that you can stop the video and write the stuff down. So just don't get too concerned about that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about resolution. I'm going to talk about resolution. Dots per inch is DPI. And there are other things. There's pixels per inch, or PPI, and lines per inch, or LPI. All of these have a different history background, and basically they are things that need to be addressed, because depending on the environment that you're in, who's talking about digitization, they will talk in terms of these different measurements, standards for how fine the resolution is, how much detail is preserved when the image or document or photograph is scanned into the computer. Okay, now let's before I get going here, let me talk about the photographs itself. If I'm going to documents, obvious, they're printed documents. If they were printed by a computer, then they probably have a resolution of the printed document of about 300 dots per inch. Most of the printers today that we see in addition to the photocopying machines, photocopy and print at about 300 dots per inch. But a printed document, for example, is a solid print. It uses ink. There are no dots. It's just a solid object. But when you digitize that, it turns it into a series of dots. So how many dots per inch are going to represent that printed piece of paper, that printed book, or the printed newspaper, or whatever. Now, newspapers are different. Newspapers actually are made up of dots. Um, they are printed off of a printing process that creates what's called a halftone screen, and those documents, if you look closely at newsprint, you're going to, particularly the photos in newsprint, photographs in the newspapers and whatever, you'll see that they're made up of dots if you use a magnifying glass and look carefully. Well, so what are we going to do? Well, first of all, and most importantly, uh, we're going to talk about dots per inch, but the issue here, and I'll probably repeat this at least a couple of times for emphasis, is you can't get any higher resolution than the original. Okay, so if your original document that you're scanning was printed on a photocopier machine or on a printer, a computer printer, it is probably maximum resolution of 300 dots per inch. Scanning it at 600 dots per inch or 1200 dots per inch or 2400 dots per inch or any other high resolution scan is not going to get you any better scan than a 300 dot per inch scan. That's the first rule. The first rule is you've got to match the resolution of the original to what you're looking at. Now, what about photographs? Photographs are printed on photographic paper usually, and they're what are referred to as continuous tone images. The reason they're continuous tone is not because they're not made up of little dots. They are actually made up of usually some kind of silver base, silver halide or other kind of chemical process, but the dots are the crystals of the silver halide or other chemicals used. And so those dots are they are completely invisible to the eye, and it's only through a microscope that you can begin to see the images. So we're talking two different things. We're talking documents which have sort of a practical resolution limit, and photographs which you would think, because they are continuous, like looking out your eyes. Oh, by the way, let's go back to the eyeball. Your eyes actually are a digital object. They use digital technology from biological digital technology, because you have what are called rods and cones in your eyes, and they're just like the little sensors in the digital sensors. So there is a maximum resolution of your eyes, and guess what it is? We'll talk about it in just a minute. So you think about what you think is the actual maximum resolution that your eyes have. And of course, if you're talking about resolution, there is never high enough. People will go into like thousands and thousands of dots per inch. And particularly now with the cameras, we're into a megapixel race where they are millions of pixels. And they keep, obviously more is better. Well, obviously not. Actually, there are physical limitations in all of this, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So the first one here is dots per inch, and this comes from mechanical reproductions of photographs and documents. And the term became into most common usage when we had what were called dot matrix printers, where they had little wires that came out and hit a ink-soaked ribbon, just like on a typewriter. And they would make a loud noise like, and they would print off what were obviously dot matrix letters, little blocky little letters that everybody got used to looking at. That was the original technology. Now, of course, we have laser printers, and they print, as I mentioned, at about 300 dpi, and it looks perfectly good to us until we start looking at it really close and blown up. And then we realized that, yes, we're still in the dot age, and there are still little dots making up those images, even if they're too small to see with the naked eye and without some kind of magnification. Okay, so this is kind of a holdover from the days of what we call dot matrix printers. Pixels per inch is kind of the more current measurement, and a pixel is a image element. So a picture element was shortened to pixel. So now they're called pixels or dots, and we see those most commonly on computer screens, particularly if we magnify an image that's already existing image very much. So here's a photo, an old photo of a family gathering, and I'm going to magnify this on the screen. And at first, this is at 100%. And depending on the screen that you're looking at it in, you're not going to see any much loss of detail here. I'm going to blow it up now to 200%. Actually, you can see more detail, it seems like, when you blow it up to 200% than you could at 100%. And you're really thinking you're seeing a lot of detail here until you blow it up to around 300%. And then you start to look at the faces of the people, particularly those women in the front, and you'll see that some of the faces are starting to kind of blur out. What looked like a lot of detail at 100% or 200% starts to look a little bit fuzzy at 300%. 400%, it becomes even more noticeable. Notice the eyes of the woman that's kind of in the middle in the front there, or both of those women there. The eyes sort of disappear into kind of a fuzz. This is possibly because there was some movement during the time the photo was taken, but it's really starting to fuzz out, like the stars on the flag in the background. They're starting to be a little less distinct than they looked originally, and that's at 400%. Now we're just going to take a big, huge jump so you can see what happens when you get out there. And I'm going out to, at this point, out to 3,200%. And you can actually see the pixels that make up this particular photograph scan. So does that mean that I want to take 3,200 dots per inch or whatever? Well, we're going to talk about that. Okay, so here's the general guidelines. Here's a pixel per inch example. If you take, if you want to look at if a picture was 6 inches wide and you took it with 1,800 dots, then that's dividing straight out. It turns out to be 300 dots per inch. Well, this formula, you can substitute any numbers you want to come up with what the pixels per inch are. So how many little pixels there are divided by the measurement gives you the resolution in dots or pixels per inch or dots per inch. Okay, but understanding this, that the number of pixels per inch does not necessarily equal dots per inch. Dots per inch is an arbitrary measurement based on output, and pixels per inch is a measurement of what the image, the sensors in the electronic image making device, the flatbed scanner or whatever, make. Now, when these items are sold, if you want to go out to buy a scanner today or sometime in the near future, or a camera, believe me, the cameras are going to tell you that they're working in dots per inch, because the public is used to that term and has a rough estimate of comparison when they talk about how many dots per inch something will produce, or megapixels per inch. But cameras, for example, the sensors on cameras started out a little bit differently, and they started talking about pixels immediately. And so now what we have is megapixels, or millions of pixels on per scanner. And it's not necessarily millions of megapixels per inch. It's actually the number of pixels on the particular sensor that's being used. So sensors also change in size. So the resolution of the sensor changes with the size of the sensor, as well as the number of pixel sensor there are present on the device. Okay, well that's kind of your technological stuff that I'm throwing in here. And if that didn't make a lot of sense, I'm going to summarize at the end and tell you what really makes sense and what you need to know. So first of all, we have the thing that I've mentioned already, megapixels. And megapixels is the actual number of light-sensitive elements or pixels in a digital camera. It's nothing to do with the size, nothing to do with resolution as such. There is an implication here that the more megapixels you have, or the more pixels you have, the higher the resolution of the camera. There was recently a Canon camera that came out with a 50 plus megapixel. So it had 50 megapixels, 50 million pixels on the sensor. And the photographers were all, oh, this is wonderful, until they all bought the camera. And then immediately they began to realize that there was no way to hold this camera steady enough to actually get the full resolution. So unless you put this on a stable tripod and took a picture without touching the camera, you always got some camera movement that would reduce the effective resolution of that camera. Okay, so there's some interesting things that happen when you start wondering, thinking you're solving all the world's problems by simply getting more and more higher and higher resolution. Okay, but the reality of it is, and this is where we come down to, so you can ignore all of those numbers and everything that's on all the advertisements out there, because the resolution that you get is equal to the lowest of the following items. The first one is the resolution of the original document or the photos, as I explained a moment ago. The second one is the resolution of the camera or the scanner. Okay, so if you've got a real old camera and it won't take as good of pictures as a newer camera, but you're still limited by the resolution of the original document or the photo, and the resolution of the printed image if it's going to be printed off. So if, for instance, you're going to print whatever you take a scanned image of, so you're going to scan this old photograph and then you're going to print off some copies for your friends or your relatives, and as you print that, that is then going to become the lowest resolution, because the printer that you're using is probably going to be 300 dots per inch, regardless of unless you're paying a whole lot of money to get a higher resolution out of your prints. Okay, so let's go into lines per inch. Now, lines per inch is an old standard. In fact, when you start talking to people and they start talking about lines per inch, it either means that they came from the publishing industry, printing industry, or they were they're engineers who date back, old engineers who have dealt with halftones reproduction. That's the kind of thing that you see on newspaper pictures, and that's a process called halftone. And they are lines per inch is resolution buildup of physical ink dots. So you're working here with little dots of ink, and the lines per inch resolution that's used to print images varies from about 35 lines per inch to 330 plus lines per inch. If you were to go to a high-end glossy art books, these big books they sell with beautiful, gorgeous pictures in them for called coffee table books sometimes, they are probably printed at the high end of 300 to 400 lines per inch. But that's it. They're only 300 or 400 lines per inch, and that's how many distinct lines of ink could be done. The size of the dots is small enough that you can actually get 300 of these lines and see the distance between them in 1 inch. But that's about the limit of printers. Here's a quick newsprint 100 line per inch, converting to pixels per inch, converting to different colors. See the numbers. So 100 line per inch newsprint is basically equivalent to 150 pixels per inch in an output resolution. And then if you're at the high end, at like a brochure or printing something in color on an 8.5 by 10 inch paper, 200 lines per inch, then it's about 300 pixels per inch. Okay, so if that's not confusing enough, I don't know what is. Now we're back to the issue of the eye. And this is really where I think that people need to understand all of this stuff is kind of meaningless unless you recognize what it is you can see. I can kick something up, it's very common for people, I hear people tell me, oh, you should scan your photographs at the maximum resolution of your scanner, whatever that is. Well, the question there is, what is that going to do for you? How much more detail are you going to acquire in the photograph that is going to help you and that you can see? And the answer is that the ultimate resolution is that of the human eye, is what we can actually see happening here. And resolution is about the perception of small details. Now, if you've had your eyes tested recently, and you're a person like me that wears glasses, you're very aware of the fact that you're not going to be able to see a lot of small detail without correction. If I today, I'm now using 2 different pairs of glasses to survive because I need special glasses that are built for looking at a computer screen and my regular variable lenses that I use for everyday use. I found that I can no longer use my variable lenses to work on a computer. Well, so okay, so we know that the eye isn't perfect. An eye has about 576 megapixels. Now that's a phenomenal number, by the way, because you imagine that the very, very high-end cameras today are 50 megapixel cameras. So your eye is a 576 megapixel camera, like an equivalent. Well, that's not really the way it works. It actually, because you only focus on a small area at a time and get the resolution, technically your eye is only the equivalent of a 7 megapixel camera. So once your camera goes past 10 megapixels, up to 20 megapixels or 30 megapixels, it's actually seeing more detail than your eye can perceive. And that's now we're going to get into the issue. And just to know, most archivists require 300 dots per inch resolution. So if you're scanning photographs or documents, they're perfectly happy to accept 300 dpi. And I've supplied documents and photos to professional archivists at universities and elsewhere, and they are perfectly happy at 300 dpi. And that comes out to approximately a 10 megapixel camera. So now that my smartphone, my iPhone, is at 12 megapixels, I have now passed to the point where I really can be concerned about the resolution of my camera as far as taking pictures that I can use for preservation purposes. Okay, and this is just for interest's sake. In order to publish a photograph, for instance, if you want to sell a photograph as a professional photographer, most of the places that sell photographs, like the stock photograph places online and everything, require a camera that takes anything from 16 to 21 megapixel image as the base rate. That's as low as they'll go. They don't mind getting higher resolution, but usually if you get too high resolution, they'll sometimes reject the photo because they say the photo's too large. So, meaning the storage that takes to record all that information is larger than they want. But this is really the practical realities of where we are. Now, what about scanner resolution? You have 2 different kinds of resolution for scanners. You have optical resolution, and you have what's called interpolated resolution. Optical means the actual resolution. So even if it says 300x 600 on the advertisement for the scanner, that's still 300. That's the first number in that 3x whatever. So 300x whatever. So that's the number that goes. Now today, current resolution on scanners is about 4800 by 4800. That's the number. The first number is the optical resolution, meaning the number of sensors that they have packed into these devices. But they say, when they're advertising, they'll say resolution up to 19,200. Well, that's interpolated. That means that they have used software to fill in the gaps and create what would look like a higher resolution image. That isn't real. It isn't what actually is physically happening. So understanding this, that the higher the resolution you go, is what you're really doing is increasing the file size and the potential size of a print. Here's a picture taken of a photograph of a photograph, and reproduced at this size. The photograph looks rather grainy, and if you were to look at the screen closely, you'd see the pixels, the individual pixels for this image. And you also need to remember you're limited to the resolution of the printer or the screen. So if you're going to display these on a computer screen, that's the maximum resolution you're going to see, no matter how high of a resolution you scan the image at. So here's an image, for instance, and this is camera resolution. Here's an image of a negative that was inverted to create a positive image in Adobe Photoshop. I acquired the image with a 21.1 megapixel Canon 5D Mark II camera on a camera stand. And so now we're going to look at the detail of the image. That's the flower. I'm going to go back. You can see the flower on the front of the dress there. So here's the flower on the front of the dress, and it looks a little bit out of focus, and that soft focus, it's called, is what the camera took that originally took this photograph. So no matter how high your resolution is, you're not going to get any sharper image than that. That's the limit of the image, of the focus on this particular image. What do archivists recommend? Quoting from the Library of Congress, in general, scan documents and photos, that's 4 inches by 6 inches and 5 by 7 inches at 300 dots per inch. To enlarge a 4 by 6 or a 5 by 7 to 8 by 10, scan at 400 or 600 dpi. So if you want to produce a larger photo, a larger output, then scan it at a higher dots per inch. And if you wanted to go to a poster size, then you would have to go much higher resolution to get the same detail that you would. If you wanted to put it on a billboard, then you would even need greater resolution. But generally speaking, if you were to get up close to a billboard, you'd find out the resolution isn't very high, because you can really see the dots in the billboard images. And this is an important point, is documents do not need that higher resolution. There's no reason to spend the extra storage space storing higher resolution. So this is 300 dot per inch resolution. And the problem I'm running into with this particular document is any higher resolution actually starts to break down the image. So 300 dpi is sufficient. 600 dpi is more than enough. And now, if you're trying to scan slides such as 35 millimeter format, there are Flatbed's film scanners, very good quality for around $250 to $350, that do a very adequate job of, a very good job actually, of scanning 35 millimeter slides. There are very high-end, very expensive slide scanners, but the slide scanners don't do any better job. They just are faster in some cases. This is not a very fast process of scanning slides, no matter what kind of slide scanner you use. Now, if you're going to save the images once they're off your machine, JPEG is the most common, and it's what comes out of most cameras. That's another reason for buying a higher end camera. And from that standpoint, what you save the image at is important. And JPEG is what's called a lossy format. That means the more you manipulate that photo with a photo processing program, the more the more information you're going to lose. But if you have a JPEG image and all you're going to do is archive it and look at it on the screen, that doesn't change the image at all, and it is just fine. It's not going to lose any quality over time. So JPEG is just fine for archiving. TIFF images are lossless. That means that you can manipulate and work with the image without losing quality. And raw images are the most useful for doing photo manipulation if you're pulling it into a program like Photoshop and making changes, because it captures all the information from the camera or device. And my very much from what it says here in these web pages from the Library of Congress is always preserve the originals. Do not think that because you have made a digital copy of the document or the photograph that you are then off the hook for disposing or destroying the original. That is absolutely bad practice from a genealogical standpoint. We need to conserve our old documents and our photographs because they are valuable historical artifacts. We need to use a little bit of discrimination there, but we obviously, from my standpoint and my perspective, I think we err way too much in where we make errors too much. We don't save enough documents and things. Most people are looking at clutter and taking up space and things like that. If you do have that problem, then by all means go out and find a place that will be a good home for your documents and preserve them more. But in any event, have them digitized. Be sure to upload them to a good website and keep them so that they can be passed and shared and put out there for people to look at. Well, thanks for watching. Once again, remind you that these webinars are uploaded to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel, and you can go to youtube.com, put in BYU Family History Library, and see all of the videos that have been uploaded. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you very much, James, for the wonderful webinar. We'd like to also let everybody know that most, if not all, of these scanners that James talked about are available for use to the public for free at the BYU Family History Library if you are fortunate enough to live close enough to come here. We understand that that's not possible for everyone, as seeing there are people from all over the country and other countries watching. We'd like to thank you for joining us today and remind you to go to our website to look at our upcoming webinars, and as well as follow us on our Facebook and Twitter accounts so you can receive updates about what's going on here. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.